My name is Wesley Dobbs Clement. I was named for my grandfather, John Wesley Dobbs. Father John Wesley Dobbs was born 1882. Eventually came to Atlanta and he married my grandmother Irene Thompson. And the two of them had 6 girls, my mother being the 4th oldest. John Wesley Dobbs was a very, although he wasn't formally educated, he educated himself by doing a lot of reading and was a postal clerk on the train back in the days of segregation. And then in 1932, he became the Grand Master of the Prince Hall Masons for the state of Georgia. This was a very prestigious position, such a big following, so he was well respected. He was a great orator. He could talk, and people, he was spellbinding with his messages because he was so prolific, and he was actually the mentor to Martin Luther King Sr. Martin Luther King Jr., that everyone knows, was born along with his last 2 daughters and grew up about 2 blocks away from his house. He had a following of close to some 20,000 black Masons in the state of Georgia. He gave up his job as a postal clerk. He became Grand Master. He was All Masonry was a branch of the free and accepted masonry, which goes back to the days of King Solomon. But Prince Hall was the first black Freemason, formed the Masons for just blacks. One of the main things that he did, all the Prince Hall Masons that joined Prince Hall Masonry for Georgia were required not only after they became a Mason, but they had to register to vote. Segregation, a lot of blacks did not vote or were not even registered. So this was a requirement that he instituted. Atlanta was one of the leading southern cities, especially for blacks during that time. Atlanta Life Insurance, as I mentioned, was headquartered on the Auburn Avenue. Citizens Trust Bank was there. There was a big church, Big Bethel AME Zion Church was on Auburn Avenue, and several small businesses, and also Prince Hall Masons. And he coined the term Sweet Aub, which is the name that it was recognized by years ago during the days of segregation, that in that area you knew that was the headquarters for black businesses in Atlanta, Sweet Auburn Avenue. His grandson, his oldest grandson, was Maynard H. Jackson Jr., who was the first black mayor of Atlanta, Georgia, being elected in 1972. And served for 8 years, and then was reelected again in 1990. Of course, my grandfather Dobbs did not live to see that day, but Maynard, before he left office, named a street for him, and also there's a statue of him on Auburn Avenue. I grew up in Durham, North Carolina, because my father worked for North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance. Was in high school. I was the only 3-letter during those days. How many sports you participated in, you would get a letter for each one, and they had basketball, football, and track and baseball, of course, were the dominant sports. But I played football, I played basketball, and I played track. I was a member of the National Honor Society. And during those days in 1963, when I graduated, You could not go and play sports in any of the white Southern schools, which is now the ACC, Atlantic Coast Conference. So I had scholarships to go to schools in the CIAA, but at that time, because my grade point average was a little higher, I was able to get accepted into. I decided to go and pursue a profession as opposed to playing sports, because it wasn't as popular as it is now, and it definitely didn't. You didn't get the money that they make now. But I went to Morehouse College, and I went to Meharry Medical College. Even though they were beginning to integrate colleges and medical schools, there was still only like one, maybe two people in schools, and there were only two medical schools during that time. There was Howard University and Meharry Medical College. So I was accepted at Meharry Medical College and went there from 1967 to 1971. And then in 1971, I decided to go to Homer G. Phillips Hospital in St. Louis, Missouri, which back in the 30s and 40s was one of the premier hospitals for the training of black physicians. The other would be Harlem in New York, and Cook County in Chicago. Homer G. Phillips was renowned in St. Louis. And while I was in St. Louis, I had the experience of studying under Dr. H. Philip Venable, who had established the Department of Ophthalmology back in the 1940s, and this was in 1971. And Dr. Venable had 4 residents. So one of the things that he promoted, that if you did your internship, and in those days, instead of just going straight out of medical school into your residency, you usually had to do a rotating internship. Rotating internship means you rotated each one of the subspecialties: internal medicine, general surgery, OBGYN, pediatrics, if you wanted to. And so I started in internal medicine and was not motivated to do residence in internal medicine, and my friends, my classmates, had come up there to become residents in ophthalmology. So I spoke with Dr. Venable, and he told me that if I were to rotate for 1 month, and if I liked it, then he would accept me as a resident for the following year. And I did that, and I liked it very much, and was accepted the following year. And as I said, he had established an affiliation for his program for Barnes Hospital. And Barnes Hospital was ranked in the top 10 ophthalmology programs in the country. The head of the department was Dr. Bernie Becker, who discovered, at that time, one of the premier drugs for the treatment of glaucoma. So they were a big glaucoma center, and they attracted a lot of the world-renowned ophthalmologists, and we would go over there for didactic work, and then have our own clinic and patients, and do our surgery over at Homer G. Phillips Hospital. So I was there from 1972 until 1975. I came to Charlotte, as I said, I started August 11th, 1975, and I'm still in practice. So August 11th of 2015 will be 40 years that I've been in practice of ophthalmology in Charlotte. And to come from a segregated childhood to now a fully integrated society, whether it's medicine, dentistry, or whatever profession, is quite enlightening. As I said, all the way up to the President of the United States. So it makes you proud to be an American and to be a part of this society.